Homeschool in the Woods. If you know anything about us, you know we're all about hands-on history. And today what I'd like to share with you about is what got us started, which is our timeline figures. Now in this case, what I'm going to be doing is showing you different ways that you can utilize timelines, but also how you can use timeline figures within other projects and just drive those lessons home that way. Now, time is an abstract concept, and it's already something that is hard to comprehend. We learn little stories and vignettes throughout history, and kids have a hard time putting these ideas together or just establishing when and where they're taking place. I consider that almost like the longitude and latitude of history, where you need this foundation, you need the spot to come together so you know when and where in history you're learning about. And then over time, these stories come together and they start to put together a bigger picture of what history was, or like puzzle pieces coming together. So timelines have a very important part of taking that abstract concept of time and putting it on a concrete framework. Now, it speaks to both the global and the sequential thinker. Most people like to do wall timelines that show the whole global picture. That's something that's wonderful because the whole family can benefit from that. As you study people and events, you'll put them on at different points and you'll see how far apart things happen. And they can take place, in a schoolroom, down a hallway. There's lots of opportunities to use wall timelines. If you don't have the space for that, however, you can use things like pattern boards or corrugated display boards, things like that, and do smaller snapshots of history and pull them out and lay them side by side, or at least have an opportunity to be able to store them easier. Now, for the sequential thinker and for all students, I think they should have a timeline notebook of their own. In this way, as they go through and they add to it, they can color all the images in, they can add in their own annotations as they go. And when they're done, after their entire school life, they're going to have a keepsake, a resource that's just as valuable as like an atlas for mapping. So what this is you've got cardstock pages, and they open up to have dates on them, and then you're adding in people and events as you learn about all throughout history. And you may start out with a few on pages, and as you go back into the higher grades, you're going to add in more detailed figures as you go as well. So what this does too is it allows you to put in your own family history. Now, I grew up in upstate New York. I have Irish heritage, and it did come from the building of the canal. So when you look back into the early 1800s, it's fun to see what was going on during that time when my earliest ancestors got here. So anyhow, this is a version that we do in horizontal, and we offer this up. You can make this with, there's horizontal notebook binders out there as well, or you can do it in a vertical format. And both of these are included on our Record of Time, by the way, download. So here it's the same idea, cardstock pages, and you're putting them in, gluing in the figures as you go. So just in with a typical 3-ring binder, which is easy to find. Now, other ways you can do them is through notebooking. Here's an example of our ancient Egypt timeline notebook, or well, not timeline notebook, it's a full notebook, but it has a timeline in it. And in this way, you can take a look at a particular time or a topic and focus on that with other projects as well within your notebook. But in the meantime, your timeline will focus on that time. So here we have what we call like a scrapbook timeline. This has the figures put in like snapshot photo format. In this case is what we've done. But here we have like a ticket to King Tut's tours, or here's a bookmark that represents a book during that time period, a general admission ticket to a wrestling match because wrestling was really big during those days, and a receipt from a spa or a restaurant, anything like that, whatever you want to put in here. It just makes it a little bit more fun and gives the kids a little bit more imagination with it as well. Now, there are other forms of doing timeline notebooks. In this case, or notebook timelines for notebooks. In this case, it's World War II, and what we've done is created what we call an accordion fold. And what this does is it allows your timeline to pull out and be viewable in one long linear timeline. So In this case for World War II, it takes a bunch of pages to get through here. And I will say that it's probably best not to go over like 12 pages or so, because it just gets heavy after time. But again, same thing here. You've got the timeline figures all laid out. The kids can add in information if they want. But it just gives you another option of how to show a timeline in a notebook and on a particular study. Here's another version. It's using a 2-ring binder, and this uses index cards. And in this case, it's Civil War. And so what you've done is you've taken your timeline figures and you've put them onto these index cards. There's actually index dividers as well, which is good because this allows you to divide up years or decades or however way you want to do it. Now, what we've done, say here we've got Abraham Lincoln. We put the timeline figure on the front of the card, and then on the back, we wrote down things like books we read, videos we watched, field trips we went on. We've got some photos here from when we went to Washington, D.C. I mean, you can really do anything you want, or even have the kids just write additional information about that person or event. You can also store index card versions like that within recipe boxes or photo boxes, shoe boxes, things like that. They come in the smaller size and in 4x6 size, so your options are, you've got several. Now, there's other ways to do topical style timelines that don't take up a lot of space. In this case, what we did here is this is from our Great Empires, and there's only like about 12 to 15 figures on here. So it's 3 pages that have just been put together, and this can tuck into a pocket in your notebook, or it can even be adhered down to a piece of cardstock and hole punched and put into a binder as well. This one is a timeline of the English Bible, and what we did was we just created a little cardstock cover and have the pages within here, but this actually opens up and pulls out to create a linear timeline as well about the history of the English Bible. So you can do this again with anything. You can do it with topics like inventors and inventions, or anything like that, composers, artists, literature, things like that. So there's other ways to utilize the timeline figures too in some of the projects that you make. For example, here we did a deck of presidents and we put them on magnet. So, and this is just magnet stock that you can find at craft stores and such, and I think it's business card actually size. So by putting them on there, we did it on presidents, but there's all kinds of topics you can do it on. In fact, that can even be used for scientists, anything like that. So here we made a fan deck, if you've ever seen one of these. We've got a couple of these in our studies, but you can do them as well by taking your timeline figure and putting it at the top and then creating a long paddle of a sort of text. Then make sure they're all the same size when it comes to that portion with your timeline figure at the top. Cut them out, line them up, hole punch them, and put the paper fastener at the bottom. And you've created a fan deck of your own. You can use timeline figures in newspapers. In this case, this one was from our Industrial Revolution one and through the Great Depression, so it covers quite a stretch of years. But we've got Custer's Last Stand over here. Let me see. Get the flyer out of it. We've got the Brooklyn Bridge as that was going up in here. We've got the Wright brothers and timeline figures from, Teddy Roosevelt, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, just, whatever you are studying at the time or whatever you want your newspaper to rotate around. You can cut them out and glue them in, or if you've got a document type setup where as you're putting together a newspaper, then just drop them into that. So another option is to use them with mapping. In this case, we have the history of the French Empire here with a map underneath and some different people and events that took place and where those events took place on an overlay. Now, some notebooking projects that you can do that utilize the timeline figures as well. Here's one on, like we did with Business Tycoons, where we just made little almost like booklet style windows. This was during our late 19th century business tycoons that were, we put a little image in that represented them and a little bit of information on the side. Or you can have the kids write in a little information as well. You don't have to use it directly, or have them use that to copy some of the text from the text description. Here we did one on famous people of the Crusades, and we did it with a matchbox fold. Just again, a little more interest in how the projects pull together. And I'll be showing you a little bit on folds shortly. Now, if you're familiar with lapbooking, this is a lapbook. This is basically a file folder that's been folded in a way that it looks like a portfolio. And here we use some of our timeline figures over here. This one is on the Industrial Revolution through the Great Depression. This is for immigrants coming into New York City and what they would encounter. So we have some figures there. I think we did one over here. Yes, historic disasters. We had a little booklet style over here for that. So again, just different ways that you can utilize your timeline figures within other projects. Now, that may seem like a larger lapbook. If you're doing something small, here's an example of something I did with our boys when they were really young. This is basically on ancient China. We took 5 dynasties and focused on those, and then we also utilized mapping on the inside as well, where we just included a little map of the dynasty itself, and then some information we found on the internet and such, and then photos, because we took, just took 2 days to read some books. We made some spring rolls, things like that. I took some photos, and we were able to put this together on that, second day, and it didn't take long at all. Another project that I wanted to mention too is, especially when you've got young kids and they want to get involved, take some of those timeline figures and blow them up into coloring book pages. That way then you can give them especially more generic figures. So if you're studying American history and you want to give them, say, George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or the American Revolution or something like that, they don't obviously need to get into the in-depth studies that the older kids are doing, but they're going to start to get exposed to some of these people or events. So, and here's another option. This is a penmanship book. My son, Sam, when he was really young, his penmanship was atrocious. So I was trying to figure out a way that he could become proud of what he was doing and want to take more effort in it. So what I had him do is I blew up the images and he would color them in, and then I would have him write the text description on just notebook paper. Because if you're anything like my kids, if they were to write directly into the book and then they mess up and they smudge it trying to erase it or rip the paper, then it kind of kills the idea to want to continue on. They get a bit frustrated. So if you can take that, the one that they're happy with, cut that out and put that in, now you've got a book with their best work in it. And I'll tell you, I would see him pulling this out over and over and just going through it, which again, now it's a little bit more remedial in front of his eyes again. So, or he'd show it to friends and family as they come in the door, and he really stepped up his game when it came to his penmanship. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about some of those folds that you can do. I mentioned the matchbooks fold. This is just simply taking a piece of paper and having 3 panels, one shorter than the middle one, and then the other one at the bottom that folds up over. And you can do titles and images, and have the kids even put the information on the inside, either bulletized or a couple sentences about something. This is a shutter fold. What this does, this is great when you want to compare things. So say, for example, you've got, you are doing American Revolution and you've got George III and George Washington or something, so it's George versus George, or anything you're comparing, whether it's monarchies or, whatever you've got. In this case, I've got actually the 2 Khans, Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan on this one. There's booklet styles you can do. We did booklets for a couple actually of our wars as well, World War II and Civil War, we've got them in as well, where we took the booklet and did a different color for each side of who was on the war, and put information on the inside for each one. Now you can do tiny booklets, or you can do taller booklets, bigger booklets that way too, where you're using your images in other ways. And here we've got Kristallnacht. This was used on the Holocaust in our World War II project. You've got Anne Frank and Corrie ten Boom and Oskar Schindler. And the information's here below, but you can have the kids fill in information. And these booklets can be on any topic. Now, another way to use timeline figures is in games. And what child doesn't like to learn through games? So card game ideas, matching games are always fun. In this case, we have here our author's version, and where we took the author themselves, and then we took the literature, just beginning literature of something that they had done. In this case, we have Jane Austen and Sense and Sensibility. There's several in here. There's Charles Dickens, and you might have, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, or Marley was dead to begin with, or something like that. So there's ways that you can match two pieces of information to each other. Or, especially for younger kids, there's also just, if you had cards with the same image on each one, if you're doing World War II, and you have two on Patton and two on MacArthur and two on Eisenhower or something like that. So you've got figures, and then you've got old dictator Hitler, one of him, and so that way you can play it as if you would be playing Old Maid. And speaking of games, here we have, make sure I got in the right direction, this way, Yankee Doodle Dandyland. And yes, you heard that right, because this is based on Candyland. And what the children would do is they'd roll a dice, and depending on the number, they would draw a card and either advance their marker or draw a card and go to the spot on here using the timeline figures all the way through to represent, everything that they've been studying about to get from the American Revolution to the White House. And the cards, of course, we used are the timeline figures as well. And we would have them read them before they advance their token. We even made the markers out of that as well. So one last one here, art gallery. This is where we took our timeline figures and went around the gallery and had the children answer questions about pieces of art on their way around there. So just different ways that you can utilize these within games of all kinds and file folder games. So I hope that this has given you some ideas and some inspiration to go out and use timeline figures in your studies and in your other projects as well. Please like, share, subscribe if you like what you've seen here. And as always, keep your history hands-on. Thanks for watching.